right. Welcome to episode 14 of Masti with Satvik Saini. Tonight I have a very special guest, Kajol. I met Kajol 2 years ago at World Hindu Congress in Chicago. And then since then, we've been following each other on social media. She's very active. She currently resides in UK. And she's passionate about mental health and even started her own project / IG account, Saath, focused on around mental well-being, mental fitness. So I thought she would be the perfect person to join me for this conversation. Without further ado, let's have her join.
Hey,
Hey, how
how's it going?
good, great. Can you see me okay?
I can. Can you see me okay?
Perfect. I like the background.
I like the little drawing in your background. I'm loving this whole thing you've got going.
Kajol, every time I talk, I can't get over the accent. Like British accents to me are always cool and always will be cool.
Same back, same back. I just love the American accent. I think it's the difference, right? Having something different to yourself. So,
True, I think it's more so like I guess an Indian person having a British accent. To me, in my mind, that just seems like extra cool. Because British accent's
okay.
been cool. It's just like the fact that you have it. I don't know. A lot in like Indians having it just somehow it's hard for me to fathom.
I mean, I guess you could say the same thing about an American accent, but sure.
Wait, they're like romanticized here. British accents are because everyone around the world has accents. Are the American accents the same down in UK?
I mean, I'm sure there's like perceptions of them. But yeah, I don't know, actually. That's a good question. Um, I don't know, but I feel like Americans think like British accents are like always really nice, but there's a lot of different type of British accents and some aren't so nice.
Interesting. Because I don't think it's the same with all types of accents. I mean, if I had an Indian accent, it's like, oh, it's kind of funny. Like, hey, do an Indian accent. But British accents are like attractive almost in society, you know? I just thought that was interesting.
Maybe, I don't know.
Anyway, enough about accents. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I know you're 7 hours ahead, so thank you for making the time tonight.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, Kajol, tell me how you got started or how you found your passion for mental health and how you even started your own IG account and even Saath, that whole project. So, walk me a little bit about your mental health journey.
Sure. So this will kind of be a sort of story. So bear with me because it's kind of, I guess, like it helps to make sense of why I sort of do it. So yeah, I guess like grew up in a sort of environment where I was surrounded by, this idea of poor mental health, mental illness, like people that I'd seen experience it. And I'm sure you can relate, it's this idea of, it's kind of, they're almost seen as people that have lost their marbles or have gone crazy. And you never really understood what it was, but it was there, if that makes sense. And then like, I guess fast forward to uni. So I moved to university, and with that comes all the normal stuff you get when you go to uni, like a new environment, new friends, like new way of living completely. And you just kind of, I don't know, you get so wrapped up in your life, well, at least I did, that you don't sort of think about what's going on in here. And then for me, that quickly kind of like spiraled into something where I realized I wasn't okay. Um, so that's kind of like in a nutshell what happened. And like, I guess as a person, I was always someone that put on this brave face and was like the comedic person in my friendship groups, and the one that just wanted to make everyone happy and laugh and stuff. I never really like checked in with myself. And it wasn't until I hit this really like low place that I was like, crap, like what am I gonna do? What's going on firstly? Like what is this thing? Because I'd always seen poor mental health as something that meant people were crazy. So it's like, am I crazy? Like what's going on? And then like, yeah, I guess in hindsight, like it was a result of stopping playing sport and picking up these like detrimental habits and things like that, that led me to get into this state. And it wasn't until I had some like really like actual deep conversations with some, friends and people who are, close people around me that kind of could see that there was something not quite right.
Mm-hmm.
That I realized, what I was experiencing was like poor mental health. Like I had really got into a way where I wasn't taking care of my mental health. You know, there was days where I remember it so clearly. Like I stood on a train and I was crying, and I remember ringing my my gran, and being like, I don't know why I'm crying, but I'm crying. And you know, that kind of moment was where I realized like this is so important, because it started to impact every aspect of my life. Like started to impact my studies, started to impact my friendship groups, things like that. And then yeah, I guess in that moment as well, these conversations also triggered me to realize like, yes, this is a bad situation I'm in, but I could also use this to allow people to know that they're not the only ones going through it, if that makes sense. Because for me, it was like, as I had more and more of these conversations, I realized how many people actually go through, like, you know, these phases, these whatever you want to call it. And it's not until you have those conversations that you realize actually it's quite a normal thing. It's not so crazy as we might previously think. And that's where Saath came about, because I was like, I guess I was like quite lucky in that sense that I wasn't in such a bad way that I couldn't speak about it.
Okay.
Me, Saath was always about sharing like where I was at, the things I was learning through this journey, and just kind of letting people know that, you know, if you're going through the same thing, like you're not alone, but also in case like there's something they could learn from my learnings, if that makes sense. Bit of a ramble, but yeah, in kind of a nutshell, that's why Saath came about.
Okay, so for the people who don't know what Saath means, tell them why that name and
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, sure. So to be honest, I don't know where I got the name from, but Saath means together. So it was always like intended to be like this space for community to share, you know, like what you might be going through, what I'm going through, and just share that together and just be a really safe space. But in all honesty, I really can't remember like why I decided on Saath at the time. Like yeah.
no, I love the name because it just unify, like it means unity. So it's especially true for people that could go through a lot of similar experiences. Saath resonates even more. So started this, and you said you didn't feel okay. So what did that mean to you throughout your journey? Like, was there some things in your life that attributed to that change, or what was going on? When did you, what was the root of it per se?
I think so. There's different things, and I think it's like different for everyone. For me personally, there was a lot of sort of, I guess the best way to put them is sort of life traumas, and like, so I'd grown up as a carer, you know, and then unfortunately lost my mum as well just before I got to uni. Varying other factors, which, you know, I never, in like looking back, I never dealt with. It was kind of like it's happened. Been upset for some time, next thing, if that makes sense. But I never actually dealt with the issue. It was like I buried it underneath and just added stuff on top. And you know, it wasn't until I was at uni in these halls on my own, and you know, at that time you get a lot of thinking time, like you get a lot of time to yourself, and that's where you start to realize you're like, crap, like all these emotions are still here, like they're really here, like I can feel them pretty badly. And you realize that you've never, because it's a conversation that's not really happened like in your life, you don't really know how to deal with it. And at the same time, I guess you have this idea of, you know, that we mentioned before, of not feeling crazy, that you don't want to say it to anyone else because you're like, is it just me going mad type of thing? I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
No, I hear you. Okay, so some of the trauma that you had in the past that you hadn't really fully peeled back the layers of per se.
Yeah.
As far as I didn't know that. I didn't know that about. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear the trauma that I guess you went through. But I guess a family loss that could be pretty detrimental.
No, sure. And I think also like looking back, it was, as much as it was that, it was also like the type of lifestyle I'd gotten into. And I'm sure you know what I mean by that. Like you go to uni and everything's like, you know, rainbows, butterflies, and unicorns, and you want to like try out everything. But pretty quickly, like frozen meals every night and, you know, not leaving your room and, you know, lazing around all day can really, you can see how that can add up and start affecting you so badly, if that makes sense.
I hear you. So, also, you're saying uni, is that like a 4-year undergrad? Is that the same thing here? University is like 4 years.
Sorry, I forgot. Yeah, you're American. Sorry. Yeah, I think you guys call it college, no? Yeah, so when you go to do, yeah, college, uni, same thing.
Making sure. Cool. And then I hear you. Yeah, especially when you get, and I mean, I'm sure it's the same way. Like, is there binge drinking down there, or like partying and people meeting a lot of people, things like that?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I got distracted by some of the comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, no, definitely. It's like, all of these new things, like everything's new, right? Like it's like when you're a kid and you go into a store and like everything's overwhelming, you want to try everything. But then pretty quickly, like you end up being sick because you had so many sweets. It's that type of thing when you go away and you see all these new like habits you want to get involved in. And then you're like, oh, okay, this is maybe not the best thing I should be doing with my life.
No, I hear you. So then, tell me a little bit about like the stigma that you had. Like, you thought mental health is like, oh, it's like portrayed in such a negative light in society. Like, when someone says mental health, you always think mental illness. So tell me how you got over that stigma and what it took you to get there.
So I love this question because I think stigma is a word that we throw around so much now that we've kind of almost like completely like just removed what stigma actually means, I guess, especially when it comes to mental health. So yeah, I guess I was quite fortunate in that I just finished my final year at university, sorry, college, and I did my project on attitudes towards mental health in Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. So kind of this idea of stigma, like what attitudes we hold towards mental health. And that through that and like exploring that, you begin to sort of understand how flawed essentially the way we talk about mental health is. So if I try to put it in the most basic way possible, like if you think of physical health, right? Say if you had a cold, you wouldn't call yourself like physically, you wouldn't say you have a physical illness, right? You'd say, I'm just a little bit ill for some time.
Ah, I see.
You know what I'm saying? But like when we say mental health or like mental ill health, automatically it's like, oh, that's it. You're like mentally ill for life type of thing. Whereas actually mental health in itself is just health in the same way physical health might be. But the difference, and this is something I've been thinking about for some time, is how come when we talk about physical health, the connotations we have are like getting fit, having the best diet, going to the gym and these type of things. Yet when we speak about mental health, straight away what comes to mind is like depression, anxiety, having this poor mental health type of thing. So it's like the connotation, even with mental health, let alone mental illness, that I think is a root of a lot of the sort of attitudes that we hold. So I guess it's like realizing that in the same way as physical health, mental health is also like on a spectrum, and we're all on that spectrum. Like there'll be good mental health, mental strength, which is, I think, defined as the ability to cope. I mean, I'm not an expert, so just my views. And then poor mental health, right? And some days we're all going to be in poor mental health because we all have those moments, those days.
Mm-hmm.
But it's when you're there for too long that turns into a mental illness. When you're there for a prolonged period of time or something that, is actually like debilitating in that sense, like you can't cope with your day-to-day demands. That's a mental illness. But poor mental health is something that everyone faces. Like everyone faces it. In the same way we might all have a cold at some point in our life, or I probably shouldn't say virus at this point because it's probably not the best example to choose, but we may have a cold, you might sprain your wrist, you might break an ankle, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You're not gonna like carry that badge. Say if you broke your wrist when you were 3 years old, you're not when you're 60 gonna be like, oh, I was a victim of a broken wrist. Like,
Mm-hmm. Depends if it's a funny story or not, but yeah, I hear you. That's really good.
yeah.
I guess putting it in terms of like temporary versus chronic, a lot of people like a
Mm-hmm.
cold is just a temporary blip in the radar of your physical health. And similarly, mental health will have these days where it's up or down. So
Yeah.
that's a really good point. I like the way you put that. Well said. As far as finding some of these attitudes among your senior project that you mentioned, what are some of the craziest findings or eye-opening findings for you?
So I think so mine was more like a review, so it was of like existing papers already out there. And I don't know, I wouldn't say there was anything that I was like, whoa, like I wouldn't have expected that type of thing. Like it was pretty much what you'd expect in the sense of the lack of understanding, of what mental health actually is, like we've just defined here, right? Like, and I think that's just something that's across society in general. But yeah, something that I think is important is language, which I heavily focused on in my dissertation, because I just think it's so important. So for example, like we're both Indian, right? I don't know, what's your native tongue? Hindi?
Yeah, Hindi. I speak Hindi at home.
So like, if you're speaking about someone that has like a mental health illness in Hindi, I mean, the words that come to mind, there's no sort of word for, you know, depression or even mental health, I don't think, in our native Indian languages. If you, for example, like in Gujarati, you say pagal, which basically means crazy, right? That's the only sort of word that may come up.
Same thing. Oh, I see what you're saying. To describe someone who has mental illness, it's usually a word that has pretty negative connotation in society.
Yeah. So like, if you think about it in that sense, then you can see why like people from our sort of communities find it difficult to sort of comprehend these issues, because we're approaching them with a westernized concept, essentially. By just saying mental health, poor mental health, we're approaching them with something that they don't understand. And that's the same for anyone else who's like, and obviously my project again focused on minority ethnic communities, so it's the same for any language it may be. A lot of these languages don't have words for mental health or mental ill health or depression, etc. So you can see why for them then this idea of like, you know, lost in translation basically, like it's difficult for them to understand what we're speaking of. And then I guess the other part I focused on again was language, in the same way we spoke about like what actually is mental health in that sense. Is something that's just thrown around, like poor mental health. You see it everywhere, right? We see it everywhere now, like better your mental health by doing this and that. And it's like, but what actually is this mental health? What is this stigma? But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of rambled. So
No, I'm here. I'm getting what you're saying as far as the Western concept. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Like how this being a Western concept, how can we or even talk about it where the connotation of language can be so negative in a way?
do you mean like in Indian communities in particular, or like?
Yeah, sure. We can start there as far as Indian communities, because we're boggled for
You're challenging me.
crazy, right? So that's an interesting point that you brought up. So that's why I'm curious. What are your thoughts on how language can be explored?
Okay, so you're challenging me now. I liking this. Okay, so I guess actually something I've been trying to do with Saath recently, right? Like you mentioned, we met at World Hindu Congress, right? And in line with me sort of going down this mental health journey, I've also been on a pretty big journey of exploring that aspect of my identity, like being a Hindu.
Okay.
So more recently, like Saath, I've tried to package, I don't know how well, so at least is my perception of like package this ancient wisdom that we know from our culture and tradition, that actually is pretty much the same as a lot of the modern day sort of I guess self-help techniques that we hear all the time when it comes to mental health. So for example, I think one of them was karuna. So we spoke about self-love. You know, someone spoke about self-love, so featuring a series of voices basically, and they speak about things that they think help their mental health, or they think they want to share with regard to mental health, and then connecting it to an ancient concept. So yeah, someone spoke about self-love, connected it to karuna. So it's like, I don't think that it doesn't already exist. I don't think these conversations don't exist. It's just that we're not understanding from that particular culture or tradition, if that makes sense. We're trying to go at it from, this is what modern society says, when actually there's probably something already there within that culture that says something similar, if that makes sense.
So how do you, okay, so you're saying, because we're trying to put it in the Western frame of mind, it can be difficult for that portion of the world to understand. So how do we come about this? How do we get to this point in the realm of mental health, do you think?
This, again, right, I am not an expert. I don't know all of it. This is very much my own journey and own reflections. But I guess, like, the biggest thing I would say is, like, self-educate, right? Like, until we go and explore these things ourselves, we cannot, like, even begin to comprehend. Like, so us, like, as young Indians, young Hindus, the best thing we can probably do is go and explore our own culture, see what it says, So then when we speak about it within our culture, we can speak, like we can provide a more authentic narrative that which people will understand. And I guess like in us doing that, we're already sharing that language is within our culture, if that makes sense. And if everyone began to do that, we then understand what different cultures have to say about these different things, if that makes sense.
To like each culture, or maybe looking introspectively within themselves to see what was said in the past. Interesting.
Yeah, I guess so. Or like even just having open conversations, right? Like having conversations with your family, your elders, whoever it might be. Like, you know, I'm sure we can speak about times where they've felt sad or had down days or whatever our language may be, but exploring like what they have to say about it, like describing almost your symptoms in your native tongue, like, you know, I'm feeling down, whatever it might be. You know, I'm feeling like this, and understanding actually from our like their viewpoint what that actually means, if that makes sense, rather than like saying you know, I'm having poor mental health. There's probably something else that can be explored. This is just a personal view. I just think that it's a huge barrier to, like, how can you expect someone to understand something when you're not explaining it in their language?
That's a good point. That's a good point.
So
It's hard. That's where I think that's where the notion of it being dismissed is readily available, because they don't understand that language.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, obviously, like, if they don't understand it, they make up their own preconceptions of what they think it means, right? So, like, if you, for example, the one you hear all the time, right, especially within, like, I guess Indian society as well. Like, we had recently the Bollywood star who sadly was lost to suicide, right? Even within that, like, you hear, what did he have to be depressed about? Like, all of these things, and it's like, it's because of that framing of depression, right? Like, and also saying like this idea of committing suicide, right? It says almost like he's committed a crime. Whereas just by saying like lost to suicide, or, you know, he had whatever it might be, or like didn't have a good support system around him, and all of these things, better actually exploring what it was rather than just sticking the word depressed or whatever on the label. It just, I think, humanizes more like the struggles that people are going through.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that as much, as far as the framing of it and how important language can be, and why our culture, maybe people who come from our culture, especially in India, maybe might be more dismissive, or even South Asia in general, or Asia in general. Eastern. So
yeah, sure. I mean, sorry. I mean, I guess I'm speaking more about Indian culture because obviously that's the culture I've grown up in, and that's what I can sort of speak on.
I hear you. I hear you. So, Kajol, as far as like you touched up on the spectrum being of mental health and fitness, so how did you learn you could improve that? And then, because everyone has these bad days, right? And then how did you know you could overcome them per se? And really, like, just how someone goes to the gym for physical health, what did you do for your mental health, a supposedly mental gym?
Oh, I like that, mental gym. I might adopt that. I think stretch your mind, you know. No, so I think I don't really know, to be honest, Satvik. Like, I think it was just a lot of conversations with friends and things like this where began to sort of take I guess look a lot more at my habits as well, and sort of the way I was viewing whatever I was feeling at that time. And something which comes up again and again is this idea of like accepting where you're at. So like, yes, I'm down right now. Like, I'm feeling pretty crap right now, right? For example. But that's okay. Like, I'm allowed to feel crap right now. But then like at the end of that, reminding yourself, okay, but I don't need to stay feeling crap. Like, that power is actually with me. And this is obviously me speaking about like poor mental health generally, not mental illness, because I think that's completely different. And I've not ever been like diagnosed with mental illness, so I can't speak on behalf of that because I know it's a completely different, you know, sort of severity. But yeah, I guess like just reminding yourself that where you're at is where you're at, and that's okay. But equally, you have the choice to then stay where you're at, or try to like change something, if that makes sense, after it. And that was something that I found like life changing. And yeah, just I guess reading more, exploring more, and really understanding how these habits, these things that I was doing on a daily basis, could begin to affect actually my mental state. So like what I was eating, you know, what I was sort of consuming in terms of like the things I was watching, the things I was listening to, the people I was surrounding myself with, like the ideas I was giving importance to, all of these things. I think it doesn't happen straight away, right? I'm still on this journey, but as we all are. But over time, you can see how it begins to completely change the way you sort of see yourself, see the world around you, and see like these blips which come along the way, for all of us.
I really like that, like saying as far as, because you're taking responsibility, because I feel like that often gets overlooked, because I think in any sort of mental health, especially because the stigmas around the real negatives, right, around mental illness, it could often be like, oh, it's a chemical imbalance, but definitely that it is. As far as like the actual life choices, maybe unhappiness at work, unhappiness in your relationships, like no sense of connections, maybe even within your family structure, things like that. Those things have to play a role. It's not possible like for us to go through daily lives without that being an impact. So I really like how you said your daily habits and maybe some things you do on a day-to-day basis, how you communicate even with family and friends plays a role. So how did you know that? All right, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Go ahead, what you were saying, and then on.
So I think it was just picking up on something you mentioned there, this idea of these daily habits and things. And I think, you know, definitely like there will be times where it's so bad that you know, need to seek professional help, and in which case do. But I equally think these daily habits that we can't dismiss. Like, you think about it, if someone has diabetes, right? Like, yes, they might get medication. Yes, they might get like support from the doctors, but at the same time, they're also told to like adapt their lifestyle. Do you see what I mean? They're not, you know, don't consume as many mithai, don't eat as many sweets if you've got diabetes. In the same way, like with mental health, like if you're in a poor mental state, why aren't we speaking about actually, well, what are you eating? You know, what time are you sort of getting up? What time are you sleeping? Are you getting enough sleep? You know, are you, I don't know what it might be, getting enough vitamins? Are you exercising even? You know, all of these things are going to feed into your mental state essentially. And again, this ties back to that, you know, what we were speaking about before, like this identity which we both hold as Hindus and explore. You look into Ayurveda, it's become a huge trend now, but actually modern scientific studies are also finding a lot of the things that are said there about, you know, dietitians and stuff are actually finding that some of the food that's mentioned that's meant to be better for your mental state is actually better for your mental state. So they can't be dismissed. And equally, practices like doing yoga and pranayama, so like breath work, there's actually studies coming out now that are showing it does affect your mental state. So, you know, all these little things, I think now's the sort of time where we explore them with due credit rather than, you know, dismissing them as we may have done before or still do in some aspects of society, I guess, where it's just like, oh, food doesn't affect, you know, like breathing, I breathe every day. Like, actually, it's more than that. Let's actually give it some exploration first. If you explore, it doesn't work, dismiss it, fine. But if you don't explore and you're just going to dismiss it straight off the bat, I don't think that's quite right.
I like that. So keeping an open mind with a lot of these building blocks, because all of them play. And then as far as, what do you think like the connections portion, or like some of these interactions you might have on a day-to-day basis, or even like meaningful work or purpose, sense of purpose, how do you think that attributes to your state or mental fitness per se?
It's a good question. In fact, this might be interesting if I ask it back to you first and then offer my insight. Do you think it impacts your mental state, like the connections you have and the work you may do?
Oh, I think for sure it does, because I think the way every human being is, I think, is looking for three things essentially. They want happiness, they want health, mental, and then wealth. But a lot of that, like happiness is so ambiguous, it's like it's such a big term. So it's kind of hard within happiness, within that umbrella comes like the sense of purpose, why you exist, what's the meaning of life for you, all these things. So I'm trying to think if somebody feels lost on a sense of purpose, like that's in those routes, it comes from a like maybe has a lot of trauma in their background or some sort of things. These types of things elude or lead its prey to maybe like addiction, things like lowered mental health, mental state. Like I read some statistic about of jobs people in the workforce saying like 75% of them or like some crazy number are unsatisfied with work. If you're unsatisfied with like a portion of your life, which you spend 40 hours a week doing on average, like there can be a downfall there. It's not to be. Right? So that's where I'm coming from. That's where I think I was like all these things, the way you interact, maybe your friends, the way healthy relationships where you guys talk about all these things has to play a role in my mind.
No, I think I'd agree. I'd agree. But then, like, I think it's equally like we can't dismiss the idea that, for example, your work statistic. For some people, you mentioned wealth is another important thing, right? Like
Yeah.
sustaining oneself is also important. But yeah, I think this is where like the connections come in, and I guess why Saath came about, right? Because it's difficult. Like, it's difficult to go out into life, especially as young people, and find these connections. As like, and this is again a personal opinion. I think especially in society today where we're so consumed with like social media, and this kind of chase for fame and whatnot, do we actually even have or make time anymore for these genuine sort of connections? Is a question I would propose to sort of everyone really, because like below all of this like glorified Instagram we might show the world, what is someone actually feeling? What are they actually thinking? Like, what are they actually going through? And in my opinion, and through the experience I've had with actually opening up to a lot of my friends and speaking on these deeper conversations, albeit at times they get annoyed with me, and that's fine. Because I'm always like, what is the meaning of life? And they're like, chill, I just want to eat pizza. But, yeah, no, I think like this sort of idea like should be explored within your friendship groups, and I found that actually that connects you a lot more than your love for, say, Will Smith. Like, that's where you actually get to know your friendships and the people you're surrounding yourself with. And the truth is everyone's going through some sort of struggle. Like at any one point in people's life they will be going through a struggle, and that's where I think as humans find that connection. Because you can begin to share part of your journey as they're sharing part of their journey, and together you find a solution. And obviously you can see as more of these interactions you then have a bigger bank of resources from which you can deal with challenges which may come your way, but equally help those in your surrounding circles, which should ideally be everyone, but help those around you to also deal with challenges which may come their way. So I think it's very important, actually, in a nutshell, to have these connections and speak to people, even if it's like someone you maybe don't know so well, but you think they're struggling. If you're, in a space where you can, ask them if they're okay. Like, guarantee that they would value it, because that's 100%, I think, a better way to connect with someone than to ask them if they watched, I don't know, whatever was on TV last night. So right. Yeah, that would be my message.
No, I like that. I think, no, that's a great point, because you would rather, I mean, the saying goes, right? You'd rather have a handful of really close friends, like close instead of like 100, or a large mass following on community or media. You have like thousands of followers. So that kind of, the genuine relationships really help. And as far as that can also, as a guy, as a man, sometimes it can be hard to do that, because I think men shy away from talking about these things more than, in my perception. Sometimes I feel like, oh man, not like, especially growing up, like oh, you're not a tough guy if you're with my friends that I'm like talking about, hey, how's life for you, this and that. As you grow older, as you become more mature, sure, it comes into play. But growing up, I was like, tough people don't talk about this and things like that. And I had this perception in Western, like growing up here, I was like, that's what I thought was cool in a way. So did that play a role at all in your life with your friends?
I think so. I think so. I definitely agree. I think that males definitely have it worse. I went really posh then, by the way. Like I didn't mean to. Yeah, no, I definitely think males have it a lot, like much more difficult because, as you said, like you're expected to be this tough guy, like persona type of thing, and you're showing like even in movies, right? Like we're showing people that don't cry, like they like hide away their tears and go and fight the whole city or whatever to save the day. But I do think it's getting better. Even by us having this conversation here, you're speaking about mental health. So to your younger cousins, to anyone younger watching this, you're already showing them that it's not something that they should shy away from. Actually something that is pretty normal. And as we explored earlier, like we all have poor mental states from time to time. So just by us sort of having that conversation, us changing that sort of narrative, I guess, it will get better. Not straight away, but like with everything, like over time and over repeated conversations, doing it more so. Even if your friends think you're lame because you're asking them about the meaning of life and they just want to eat pizza, they will know that you're the person that they can then speak to. And I think that actually plays a huge role when it comes to being in this poor way. But yeah, definitely agree with your point that like for males is worse. And I would definitely also resonate because I think, especially being like as sporty as I was back in the day, I definitely felt this, almost put this pressure on myself, like, no, I'm fine. Like, I don't cry. And then actually go and hide away in a corner and cry and then come back and be like, no. But yeah, like now I've got to a place, I think, where it's like, actually it's quite healthy to cry. It's pretty cathartic. And, sometimes, yeah, I might cry at Marley and Me and like get my emotions out and carry on with the day.
You don't cry in Marley and Me, you're a psycho. I truly, that is such a sad movie.
What about I Am Legend? That one too. Tearjerker.
That zombie movie. That was sad.
Yeah.
I recently watched the re-edition of Fault in Our Stars with Dil Bichara, the actor who committed suicide, and that was sad. That was hard to watch too. Definitely.
Seen that one.
But yeah, that's a good point. I don't mean to say like, oh, as a man, it's like harder for me or anything like that. I'm just saying that's just something that I thought of, like the stigma around it for me growing up. Not everyone,
No.
But just even in friends group, I guess once you break that barrier, I think it's important and crucial in any everlasting relationship.
No, I'd agree. I do, because I do think it is, it's a much more difficult for males, I think, because there is this sort of underlying expectation of males have to be the strong one. But as I mentioned, I do think it's getting better because there is more people speaking about it, especially celebrities, actually now speaking about, going through the places they sort of went through, the struggles they had, especially sports people. You see it huge in sports people now, where a lot come forward with the kind of struggles they faced as well. And I think it's great. If anything, I think there should be more of it. So
that's true. And do you actually ever think, like, since social media, I know I've touched on social media in a couple of my other episodes too, like it makes the celebrity out of everyone per se, right? You have this ego that we try to, this perception of us, like you, Kajol, me, Satvik, on Instagram is much, probably we try to do the highlights of our life, right? This perception we try to keep up. So making a celebrity out of everyone using the internet these days, because celebrities are probably miserable people in the world. Do you think having this ability to broadcast is detrimental in any way for mental health? As in, like, let's say I follow a certain celebrity, Will Smith. He talks about him going through depression, and I feel like I've had a couple of bad days, and I also think I'm going through depression. And I think that could lead to a different path down that road, right? Where you could be like, oh, Will Smith has it. I felt lonely a couple 2 days. I think I have it too. I think that could almost go down a road we don't really want to, in a way. As a food for thought.
No. I see where you're coming from, but I think like with most things, it's like finding that balance. So it's actually like, okay, like I know I'm using social media, but like, what is my purpose for using social media? What is my, like, what do I want to achieve from putting up this post? maybe, and there's nothing wrong with it. I just want to post a photo of myself because I want people to see how good I look today. Fine, do it. Like, you know, do what makes you happy, sort of thing. But equally, don't get so caught up that you're then spending every aspect of your day like, oh, how do I get the perfect photo of myself, you know, and the best filter to like put on my life to put across this front of who I want people to think I am, if that makes sense. How do you kind of keep it to yourself, like keep your sort of social profile being yourself without getting so obsessed with yourself, sort of thing? Because I actually think social media is a great tool. I mean, we're connecting like what, 7 hours apart, 8 hours apart right now. This wouldn't be possible if we didn't have social media. So I don't think we can say that it's entirely detrimental, but I think like with everything, it's finding that balance between enjoying it and actually like overdoing it. And I guess with your second point about like celebrities, I love that comment, by the way. Like, celebrities are probably the most miserable people in the world. Yeah, I see where you're coming from. But actually, I don't know. I think it's a difficult one, and probably quite hard for either of us to say, you know, by celebrities sharing their mood, like it might make people think that they're going through a tough time. Because I think maybe for young people, like very young people, it's very easy to be swayed by that sort of thing. But again, I think I'd encourage that over celebrities not speaking about it, someone struggling alone. Because even in that, like, even if someone thinks they might be going through depression, at least they're going to then go and explore what that depression is. At least they're sort of accepting that they're not in a good way, if that makes sense. I don't know, like it's something that I've not really thought about too much before. But I guess like where I stand right now is like it's probably better to speak out than to like not speak about it at all and that lead to people suffer in silence. But equally, I see where you're coming from.
No, that is tough because you're saying you'd rather live with the repercussions of people speaking out and then people like self-diagnosing because at least it's being heard and then you can work back.
Mm-hmm.
No, I hear you. It's just at times it's just something that comes to mind. I just feel like sometimes maybe self-diagnosis like that could be dangerous because there's a lot of people who actually not I'm not diminishing anyone's struggles, right? Like you were saying, like on the spectrum, everyone has bad days and has these struggles. But once you make predicaments like that, like, oh, I went through depression too because I had this 3 day bad pain. That's when it kind of devalues the people who actually go through something like that. That's what I would
No,
think.
no, and I agree. I think you know, again, there's a balance, right? So like if like celebrities are speaking about them being in a poor mental state, having poor mental health,
Yeah.
that's fine, right? Like they're speaking about like a very real struggle they're going through, and sharing that with the world. But equally, I think there comes responsibility from all of us. Like if we're speaking about like you've been, because with things like depression, anxiety,
Yeah.
you get diagnosed, right? Like you get diagnosed by a doctor, and that requires you self almost like approaching basically the doctor in the same way you might do with any other illness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, like you wouldn't say I have diabetes until the doctor said you had diabetes, right? Like why would you? So I guess like that with social media definitely comes a responsibility on all of us that if you are sharing something like this, you know, actually sharing like maybe like not how it came about, but sort of say like with the example you used, right? If someone like was diagnosed with depression, actually sharing that they've been that aspect that they've been diagnosed, they've actually gone to a doctor and whatnot. So then that responsibility comes with it, that any young person then viewing that won't self-diagnose because they understand that it's prolonged and it, you know, I don't know how to explain it, but I hope I kind of got across what I'm trying to refer to.
No, I hear you. So then that way they can get the help appropriate for them, depending on the situation.
Yeah.
I hear you. Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, that's something to think about because like it does, with just like with anything, like there's the pros and cons, and like that I just thought was like as a con. But I think I would also lean the side of your point of view where I think it's more good than bad. But it's just a newfound problem, I guess, with this ability to broadcast and be celebrities.
No, definitely. I think like I would probably just lean back on that responsibility point, and that comes to all of us again, right? Like have like taking responsibility for not only what we're putting out there on social media, but equally like where we're at. Like I think I am struggling, taking that responsibility to actually seek support. So, and I know that can be really difficult at times, but that's why we're having this conversation here, I guess, like encouraging people to have that conversation with us. We're here, speak to us, speak to your friends, speak to those around you, and just starting that so you can eventually get into a way where you can cope with the challenges that come your way.
I hear you. And then Kajol, as far as like I know we touched on this a little bit. You talked about being present in the moment per se, and then meditation, to like having that state of mind. How important do you think that is for mental in that journey? Something maybe you explored yourself through your project Saath. So maybe touch up on that a little bit.
No, definitely. I'm just wowed at the tough questions are throwing my way. No, I love it. So yeah, being present. Being present, I think, yeah, definitely important. Like we mentioned earlier, this idea of accepting where you're at. Like, I'm here in this place, and I think, and again, I'm not a professional, so just my view. But this is where like that meditation helps, right? Because it's not just about the practice that you're in. It's about applying that to your day-to-day life. So actually it teaches you to slow down and just sort of accept where you're at, because, it's always this idea of just let the thoughts pass sort of thing, like just watching the thoughts pass, slowing down and accepting that, I don't know, my back hurts right now, for example. Even that small thing, like over time, as we mentioned, right, at the mental gym, it turns into something which, with regular practice, strengthens, and then comes into other aspects of your life, right? So then you learn to be present where you are. So right now, I'm present on this live.
Yes.
Right, that's where I am. Like, I'm, trying to stay focused on the conversation, right? And you can see how over time that would help you to sort of slow your thoughts down and sort of just be in the moment that you're in. But again, I think it's tough. Like, I'll speak as someone who's very fidgety and very like jumpy, but it's something that I've tried to do a lot more of, like sort of slow down and sort of just, I don't know, even just like watch the sunset, which is something I've always done, but try to do it with a lot more sort of intent of, I'm not here to take a photo of the sunset. I'm just here to watch the sunset type of thing. So yeah, and I can't remember the second aspect of your question you said, so you might have to repeat that.
Honestly, I don't remember either, but like that's going off with something you said. Same, like very fidgety, like my mind's always racing. And honestly, were you like at first when I was first exploring meditation, I didn't really believe in it. I was like, I don't know if this shit really works. Like, I was kind of like a non-believer. That actually forced me just to see, because first you have, like you said, just let your thoughts pass, kind of whatever comes in a way, to be present, like breathing and how that helps you get there. Initially, it was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Meditation's uncomfortable. A lot of people don't touch up on like, oh yeah, you should do this. It's like, it's really shitty at times. You're just like sitting there, comfortable, your mind's racing. Oh, I have to do this shit, I have to do that, I have to do this, that, this. Like, sitting through that takes time, but it's like this initial curve. And how regularly do you do something like this? How regularly do you meditate?
I guess it depends what you define as meditation, right? Like, some may say I'm meditating right now, like, because I'm focusing on like what I'm doing right now. But like, I guess like actual like sit down and just, I don't know, sit down and just focus on what's going on up here. Maybe like, I try to sort of every night before I go to sleep, like even if it's 5 minutes, just sort of take that time of, and I know 5 minutes sounds really short, but I find that by framing it as 5 minutes, it doesn't sound that bad to me. Like, as you said, it can be really crap. Like, I'm going to box out 20 minutes. That sounds crazy to me. Like, I could watch a whole episode in that time. Do you know what I mean? And, as this is something we were both speaking about earlier, right? Like, that we're both like these people that find it hard to sit still. And I think especially as people that are sporty, is increasingly difficult to just sit still. You're like thinking about the next 10, 20 things that you want to do. But I do think it's important to make time in your day to just stop and slow down, even if that's like while you're eating, right? Put your phone and TV and everything away, just focus on your food. That's like time that should be built in, I think. Laughing in the comment, 5 minutes can be a lot, right? So if it start at 2, start at like 3, and then build up, I guess, is what I'd say. But yeah, for me, like 5 minutes at night. Sometimes if we're like on a good week, 5 minutes in the morning as well. You know, if we're feeling really like I can do this. But yeah, like it's depends on what you define as it, and depends on how you'd like to take it, because there's so many apps, so many YouTube videos, so many like different things out there. Whatever's best for you, I guess it's just trial and error, right? To find like what suits you.
True, and I think I touched up on this a little bit with my last guest. We talked about this video I watched, Novel Ravikant. He mentions like meditation, essentially all forms, essentially is the art of doing nothing. So if you can somehow put that in your day in some way, and actually have an unpopular opinion, I think if you're using an app or a YouTube video or some like external stimulus for that, I think it defeats the purpose in my mind. This might be unpopular, but if you're like connected to an app and it's like playing some whatever, some like jargon, and you're counting your ticks or and like using it as a comparison method, it defeats the purpose in my mind.
I think it's interesting because I think like also the point you touched upon, like doing nothing, like can you ever really do nothing? So I think I'd actually frame it as something opposite. And you know, again, like go completely against the grain here and ruin your dialogue. But instead of doing nothing, can we actually view it as like completely focusing on what you're doing, right? Because I think it's very difficult to say to do nothing, right? Because you're always going to be doing something. Like you're going to be thinking about something. You're going to be thinking, I'm sat here right now, or I'm thirsty right now, or my back hurts, or why am I doing this? So it's actually like just focusing on what you're doing. So if you've got the app, focusing on what you're listening to. If you know, are chanting something, focusing on the chanting, like the way it feels, like, you know, coming out of your mouth, I guess, the way it sounds in your ears. If you're just sort of sitting in that moment, just focusing on your breathing, focusing on like having the right posture, focusing on whatever it might be, like us right now, focusing on what we're speaking about.
Yeah, without one.
Without wondering too much, like, oh, well, what am I going to, so for me, like, what am I going to have for dinner? Or, you know, like, I want to do this before I get to bed or whatever. No, like right now I'm here and that's what I'm focusing on. And yeah, as far as your unpopular opinion goes, like, for me, it's like whatever suits you, right? Like if that helps you, who am I to say? Some people go to the gym, some people prefer home workouts. You do you.
That's if it works for you. And actually, I would say the art of doing nothing, essentially doing nothing is doing something, because doing nothing as in, I'm saying as in like no external stimulation. Sitting there, like whatever thoughts come, not like you just think with a blank slate, it's like a white paper in your mind. Like that's impossible. That is never gonna like doing nothing as in just like sitting and whatever you're doing, let it happen. Just do without any like YouTube or some app or anything like that. That's where I'm coming from. But
yeah, no, definitely.
If your boat floats with an app, go ahead. Who am I to tell you? But that was just what I was thinking.
No, definitely. I see where you're coming from though. But yeah, again, like I guess what suits you, right? Like I think I don't really know. For me it's just sitting in the moment, I guess. Sometimes I put on like, I guess, background music, but that's just because I feel like having background music on. But yeah, like whatever suits you and you in that moment, really.
Yeah, I hear you. And then, because solidarity is a tough balance, right? Because being alone, like you mentioned in a uni, you can often spend a lot of time alone, frozen dinners in the dorm, in the hole, what maybe. That can, with anything, there's a balance. If you spend too much time in solidarity, it can be detrimental, but not spending enough could also. So that balance is something I'm currently trying to find. Like just sitting in a room by myself for some time to see how that works. And just like with anything, obviously I'm not doing it every day, but something I thought that was fascinating, finding that balance with solidarity.
No, of course. And I think, again, like we've touched upon it so many times now, but like balance is like just a key word in so many aspects of life, right? Like everything requires finding a balance. But like I always imagine it as that thing, like I forgot what it's called, but you know where the thing moves across like this and then eventually it stops in the middle, right? Like it's going to take you years for the balance to be like struck, but like by you knowing that a balance is required, you're already getting closer to the balance, if that makes sense. I really just feel
The pendulum?
yeah, or pendulum, yeah. But you know what I mean, the other one where it's like I can see it, I don't know what it's called. But yeah, like a pendulum as well, like it's swinging and eventually it stops, right? So but yeah, I think balance is something like that we're constantly trying to find, I guess, in so many aspects of life. And yeah, to your solidarity point, like again, I think it's important to spend time on your own, especially in the world we live in right now, where everything is so hyper connected, right? People are on social media all the time. You know, within seconds we can connect like across the globe. Like so, finding that time as well, equally to sit with yourself and just go, actually, what do I think about this? You know, especially with all these like big news things that are coming up and coming and going, and that will continue coming and going. What do I actually think? How do I feel? Where am I at right now? Like, I think that's important. And I wonder if that's something that we do enough as young people. Because I think very much we've grown up in this social media age where like we're not really used to anything other than being so connected.
Sure. I think, how old are you?
22.
22, yeah. So 23. So I think unfortunately, a portion of my life was without social media or like having a phone. So I guess we do years, but I think majority of our formative years have been with. That'll be fascinating. I think the next generation coming up will be even more challenging for them.
Definitely. No, and I agree. Like I mean, similar to me, right? Like, but I can't really. I remember more of my life like being so connected than I do not being connected. If that makes sense. But I can see the difference even in my younger siblings, right? Like for them, it's constant. Like the phone is like an extension of their hand. Like, so it's important, I think, to take that time, even if it's 5-10 minutes before you go to sleep, to actually turn your phone off and just go checking in, like, I'm Kajol, you know, I'm still a human, like beyond the screen, type of thing, and just remembering who you are, where you're at, what matters to you, and how you feel about things.
That's a good point. So Kajol, we're approaching the end because it kicks me off after an hour. I know we could go on and on because this is such a fast. But as we're approaching the end of our conversation, what is something you're exploring with Saath, like a new topic, and then some final words you want to leave us by?
Ooh, tough one. So with Saath at the moment, yeah, just sharing a lot of voices, as I mentioned earlier, of messages essentially people have to share with the world. So pretty blessed to be surrounded by such inspiring people, really, like people that have affected so much of my journey, I think, and still do today. So it's just sharing those voices with the world, really, and that's what that's all about. And yeah, and then tying that, as I mentioned as well, to sort of some of the more ancient concepts which already exist that I find so fascinating. Like our ancestors already knew a lot of these like solutions that we try to still provide today. Like they already exist, and we think like, yeah, I'm sick, I've just found this. Like, no, they already like they knew. So yeah, connecting those is something right now. In terms of a final message, this is a tough one, but I think like out of everything we've sort of said is just the biggest thing I'd say is just like, well, two things. One, check in with yourself regularly. So, you know, find that balance between yourself, like being with yourself and being with your friends, as we mentioned. And the second aspect is when you are with your friends, when you are with your peers, aim to make genuine connections. You know, have those tough conversations, and don't be afraid to be in these tough situations, because they're going to come up, and the more you do it, the easier they'll be.
I love it. Thank you so much, Kajol. I appreciate your time. I know you're 7 hours ahead. Good night's rest, and I'll share this episode and Saath and everything accordingly.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, and have a great night. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Well, that was episode 14. Thank you so much to Kajol for coming on. It was a fascinating conversation, and as always, I'll share this episode out on all platforms. So look forward to that, and check more of her workout. doing good work. Thank you all and have a good night.